This is the Everyday AI Show, the everyday podcast where we simplify AI and bring its power to your fingertips. Listen daily for practical advice to boost your career, business, and everyday life.
Most AI tools at work don't know anything about you. Every time, you're stuck re-explaining your projects, your team, what actually matters. Slack just fixed that. The all-new Slack bot is a personal AI agent built into Slack, and it starts with your context, your messages, files, and channels. Translation, an AI that already knows how you work. Check it out at slack.com. Anthropic had a really bad week. So some context first. When Anthropic released its very popular Fable Mythos 5 models, they warned the world that they were too dangerous, hyped them for months, released it, got it pulled by the government, fought with the White House, and dragged its reputation with developers through the mud in the process. And its biggest competitor in OpenAI this past week, well, worked with the government to release its new GPT-5.6 sold properly without months of trumpeting its own horn. It stole all the benchmarks back from Anthropic, and now Anthropic is having to enter the week with its tail between its legs. And what made matters even worse for Anthropic? Yes, OpenAI released even more with its new live voice mode and ChatGPT for work, but Anthropic actually got two new serious competitors for its coding API business in Grok 4.5 in Meta's Muse Spark 1.1. Yep, it was one of those busy weeks in AI where positions at the top seemed to shift every day, and your head was probably left spinning trying to keep up. Don't worry, we'll get your head on straight as we unwrap it all on our weekly AI News That Matters segments. All right, welcome to Everyday AI. If you're new here, my name's Jordan, and well, we do this every day. It's your daily, unedited, unscripted live stream podcast and free daily newsletter helping business leaders like you and me not just keep up, but how we can make sense of all these happenings and use that information to get ahead to grow our company and our career. So it starts here, but please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify or wherever you're listening, and make sure you go to our website at youreverydayai.com. We're going to highlight everything we talk about here as well as everything else that you may have missed today. All right, so y'all just don't do this every day. I'm just saying that now because it's going to start really heating up. Acceleration is accelerating. There's only going to be new models quicker, new features quicker, new drama, new partnerships. Y'all, you have work to do. So just tune in on Mondays and well, every day, and we'll keep you up to date. All right. First story, one that a lot of people didn't see coming. Well, Apple sued OpenAI on Friday, alleging that its consumer hardware team stole trade secrets through two former Apple employees. So Apple says OpenAI encouraged recruits to share confidential information and avoid scrutiny during hiring, according to reports. So its complaints name Tang Tan and Chang Luai. So OpenAI denies any wrongdoing, and it says the company focused on building its own technology rather than using Apple's secrets. So that leaves the two companies in a strange position. Apple still integrates ChatGPT with OpenAI, and while OpenAI is also developing hardware that is likely going to compete at one point with Apple's core interface. So the filing also gave Elon Musk some fresh ammunition against Sam Altman, and Musk quickly turned Apple's allegations into another public attack on X. And for those not keeping score at home, 2 months earlier, Musk lost his OpenAI case against the company after a jury found that he filed too late, and he has promised an appeal. So Musk took the opportunity to call Altman a scammer across several posts, and Altman, while I was grabbing my popcorn reading the replies, answered by suggesting Musk's renewed fixation showed that GPT-5 must be really good. Neither man, though, is a party to Apple's case. Their exchange, though, is in reaction to the filing, not evidence that Apple's allegations are true. The timing obviously adds another layer. Elon Musk's SpaceX debuted at a whopping an impressive 2.5 trillion valuation as they went public a couple of weeks ago, while OpenAI submitted its confidential IPO paperwork in June. So we'll see what happens with this lawsuit. It seems like it's not really anything to do with OpenAI as a company, but just the employees at OpenAI. And it could maybe impact OpenAI's hardware plans. It depends on what happens with this suit. And well, it puts also one of Apple's most powerful, at least so far, consumer partnerships under the spotlight. So obviously, Apple's Siri moving forward is going to be powered in part by Google's Gemini models, but up until now, it was powered by ChatGPT. So essentially, any query that you talked to the not so smart Siri over the past year and a half or so got routed to ChatGPT. Essentially, Apple said, "Yeah, our Siri can't handle this. We're going to partner with ChatGPT to give people the answers they need." So yeah, it's one of those like awkward moments where it's like, wait, you guys are still kind of friends, but definitely enemies. And now this is at least the first time that we've seen a public lawsuit going from Apple against OpenAI. And we have heard that OpenAI has hired quite a few talented engineers, not just on the hardware side, from across Apple. All right. Our next piece of AI news, a big release for Apple, or sorry, that for OpenAI that makes Apple's hardware so much better. My gosh, I probably played and by played, used, I probably used the new GPT Live feature from OpenAI almost as much as I used the new GPT-5 6 Soul model. So let's talk about OpenAI's new launch as they released GPT Live this past week as ChatGPT's new default voice model for paid plans. And I do think that they have some, although very limited, use for free plans as well. So previous voice conversations before this, well, they still felt kind of turn-based, right? It was walkie-talkie. And this was whether it was OpenAI's advanced voice model, Google's Gemini Live, and there's some others, but I would say those were the two leaders, but none were really good because essentially, someone would speak, the model kind of waited, and then it answers. So GPT Live has this, kind of dual mode, right? Where it can listen to you and speak at the same time, right? So it feels much more natural. And not only that, but it can actually query things in real time, which is something, right? When Gemini Live first came out, I was super excited that it had that capability, but it was always very delayed. Right. It couldn't do it live. So the cool thing about this new GPT Live voice mode is you can say like, hey, what's the biggest, what's happening in my city this weekend? And instantly, within like a second or two, it's going to start talking, right, about something that's factual. Whereas before, with like Gemini Live as an example, it could do that, but it would take a good like 4, 5, 10 seconds, right? And you didn't have this ability to have the conversation be dual in tone, right? This full duplex mode essentially, where you can be talking and it can interrupt you and it doesn't break the flow, and vice versa. So it's been a pretty impressive model so far. So essentially, it allows the model to listen while also speaking. It can better handle interruptions, stay quiet while someone thinks, and decide when a tool is needed. But harder questions then move to the GPT-5.5 model in the background without ending the live conversation. So then the interface stays responsive while another model works. So OpenAI says more than 150 people use voice or dictation this each week. So this is not just a small audience. This is pretty big. So right now, it is the paid plans that have access, although I believe like enterprise and EDU counts don't have this just yet. And there should be video and screen sharing coming soon to go along with this live conversation mode. So yeah, like I said, if you've tried the other kind of voice modes, right? So OpenAI had its standard voice mode. OpenAI had its Advanced voice mode, neither of those were very good. Although when advanced voice mode came out, it seemed better. But, for the most part, the, AI voice modes that came out in, 24 and 25 were essentially just sounded more human and the latency was a little less. Right. But they couldn't call tools essentially. Right. The thing that I did with this, I had a 60-page document. Right. And so I just opened up my phone. I had the document saved in there. I did that. I had to do some driving and I just talked with ChatGPT live voice for, the 20 or so minutes that I was in the car and had a really good conversation. And that's something that none of the other voice modes have been able to do, is to consistently, chat over a document, which is one of the big reasons why I always want to use voice mode. Right. It's maybe one of the reasons I use the interactive join feature in Notebook LM's audio overview. So if you haven't used that, it's really good, but this is much better, right? That one, it always kind of goes back to the same track where obviously with GPT Live, right? Think the way I use it, I had this 60-page doc and I'm like, hey, ask me questions. And, depending on my answer, go and keep asking me more questions. And then I can go back and use the transcript. And it was actually super helpful. All right, our next piece of AI news. Yeah, we had a lot of releases this week, y'all. So Grok 4.5 from xAI is out. So Cursor and SpaceX AI. So yes, it's called SpaceX AI, and Cursor obviously is part of SpaceX AI, but they jointly trained and released Grok 4.5, giving the coding platform a model it helped shape around its own workflow. So Cursor matters here because it owns the application and controls the model routing, and it doesn't need users to choose Grok as a general chatbot. So Anthropic has built substantial commercial momentum around coding and agentic work. So this is part of that premium that a cheaper rival can attack. So yeah, this is another part of the bad news for Anthropic, that Grok 4.5 on a lot of benchmarks, because, on things like SWE Marathon, there were some other, I think, T3, there was terminal coding, a couple other benchmarks that Grok either tied Fable in or was actually better than Fable, and Opus obviously as well. So pretty interesting, right? It's not great on all benchmarks, Grok 4.5, but I think for cheap coding tasks, right? Or if your company is just coding software development, right? I think, 2 years ago, it's like hands down, everyone's using Anthropic. 18 to 12 months ago, right? Google came into the mix. And then over the past, 3 to 4 months, we've seen open models. Now with, OpenAI's 5.6 Luna. It's like, that's a fantastic model, cost efficient. And now we have Grok 4.5 joining the foray. So the price comparison, yeah. So Grok is $2 per million input and $6 per million output, versus Fable that is literally 5 times cheaper on the inputs and nearly 5 times more expensive. So Fable is 5 times more expensive than Grok. And on the output side, it is nearly 10 times more expensive. So yeah, Grok 4.5, $2 per million in, $6 per million out, versus Fable's $10 per million in, $50 per million out. So SpaceX also reports 4+ times fewer output tokens than Opus 4.8 on one test. So saying it's not only a lot cheaper, well, it's also just way more token efficient. So we'll see what happens here, because one thing I've always said, I don't think the general public is really ever gonna use Grok. I don't think that. Will they use Cursor's composer models? Maybe, but I do think that certain types of organizations, certain people within certain departments will use Grok's models. And I think maybe we'll see the first kind of mass enterprise adoption with Grok 4.5 just for this, for people who are just refactoring entire code bases, right? When you're talking about, in those cases, burning billions of tokens an hour, probably way more, right? That's when you have to start looking at like, hey, maybe our team should be off this, this expensive model and be looking at something like, maybe a Grok 4.5. All right, speaking of models and routing them to other places, this one's interesting. According to reports, Microsoft is now starting to use its own internal models, the Microsoft AI models, for some Excel and Outlook features, according to a Bloomberg report. So, according to the reports, for many employees, Copilot is not just one among several. It may be the only AI that their company can use. That's not according to reports. That's just in general, right? Because so many enterprises out there, they just use Copilot. That's all that's approved, right? And luckily, right, because Microsoft's own models aren't very good yet. They're getting better, right? But
here's what most AI tools still can't do: work outside their own little box. The all-new Slack bot just changed that. It's your AI teammate inside Slack, and now it can read, write, and act across the other apps your team already uses. No more tool switching, no more re-explaining yourself every time you open a new tab. One ops team at Engine says the summary feature alone saves them 15 to 20 minutes a use. See what Slackbot can do at slack.com.
the reason I think Copilot has still been fairly decent to above average versus, the dozens of other competitors out there as well, because they've been able to use the Anthropic and OpenAI models, right? Powering Copilot. But now, according to reports, they're starting to try to save money and swap it out and use their own MAI models. So Microsoft can still switch the intelligence underneath the product. So most employees will never know whether it's an MAI, OpenAI, or whether it's Anthropic's that answered. So tens of thousands of Excel and Outlook prompts already are reportedly running through MAI each week, making this a production change rather than a future promise. So the likely architecture, though, is tiered. Microsoft can still use kind of this cheaper internal models for routine prompts, and then reserve, GPT-5, 6, or Sonnet 5, or other frontier models for harder work. Quality is also the unresolved issue here, right? So one recent large government trial found that 44% of participants using other generative Gen AI tools preferred them versus Copilot. Yeah, cat's got my tongue today, apparently. So essentially, here's what it means, right? I think Microsoft, we've seen reports that they're looking at potentially using DeepSeek models for some of their Copilot co-work. So it's not surprising necessarily that they're going to start to use some of their own internal models. But I think ultimately what this is, which I've been talking about this now for a couple of months, it's kind of this overhang, right? Like 90-ish% of what these models, right? GPT-5, 6, Claude, Fable 5, 90% of their capabilities, most people don't need it, right? Until our day-to-day work catches up with where the models are. A lot of what these more frontier models are, well, it's overkill, right? That's why even within the own systems, right? One thing I set up over the week is, well, I set up a lot of fun things, by the way. Now I'm, using Soul, 5, 6 Soul inside of Codex. I'm using Fable inside of, I'm using, let me get this right. Using Claude Code and then pulling in GPT-5, 6 Soul, and then vice versa inside Codex, using Fable 5. But I think this is also why now internally people are setting up skills using this same models within one company, right? Where it's, hey, we're just going to use Fable in Claude Code or in Claude Cowork as the planner, and then we're going to use something like Sonnet 5 or something like that. So even not just for people that are paying for the tokens via the API, but also people, if you're on a $20 a month plan, you're going to have to start using these things, because as the models become more and more powerful, well, all that means is they're just using more tokens. They're calling more tools. They're becoming more agentic. So, 6-9 months ago, a $20 a month AI plan subscription felt great. So it's these two things happening at once. All these companies, cutting costs, and they're saying, well, the token subsidy is over. And the fact that, well, agentic systems are using more tokens. And obviously those things go hand in foot. But uh, it goes to tell you here that Microsoft, both looking at DeepSeek and their own internal models, but I think this is actually indicative of a bigger shift moving ahead. So, if you're a Microsoft Copilot organization, I wouldn't look at this in a bad way necessarily, because I'm sure they're doing it extremely meticulously and strategically. So ultimately, users don't notice, right? Because if all of a sudden people that don't already, right, the general consensus around Copilot is it's not the best, right? A lot of people, that at least I talk to at larger organizations, once they get approval for something like, Claude or OpenAI, they're usually happy because, Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, as good as it is, it's just the learning curve is outrageous just because of the permissions and the security, right? It's so hard where things like, Claude and, OpenAI, ChatGPT Codex are kind of like plug and play and very easy, less of a learning curve. But yeah, even within their own ecosystem, I think you're going to start seeing, people setting up these model routers, right? Like, yeah, using Fable 5 as the, front end strategist and then kicking some of the actual work to like a sonnet or an opus or maybe even a haiku. All right. Our next piece of AI news, a new study is saying that, well, most Americans don't think AI companies should own their own companies. So a new Verasite survey found that 69% of those surveyed supported requiring major AI companies to transfer half of their stock into a publicly owned fund. So decent size survey. It covered about 1,700 US adults, and it ran this past June. So a fairly recent poll. And it did support different party lines. So this was interesting because I thought originally seeing these kind of studies, I'm like, oh, this is going to be across party lines, and it wasn't. So supports crossed party lines, as 82% of those respondents were Democrats, 77% independents, and 59% of Republicans initially backed the proposal. Then, when they surveyed people, told people a little bit more information, when they attached Bernie Sanders' name, overall, the support fell to 64%, although nearly half of the Republicans still supported it. So, yeah, former presidential candidate, Democrat independent Bernie Sanders. So Sanders did introduce that related legislation about a month and a half ago, but forcing companies to surrender half their equity obviously faces enormous political, legal, and implementation barriers. And this new survey arrives as frontier labs prepare for public markets and technology companies cut jobs, and the public debates who will capture AI's financial upside as they're looking to move into people's backyards for the needed data centers. So also Sanders' bill that he put out, it's not going to pass, right? This is right. I used to cover politics. Like 95% of the stuff that you read about, in the news, it never actually comes to a vote, right? It's a way for politicians to kick some dust and to push certain agendas. But what's interesting here is, although I think that the 50% thing will never happen, right? What's interesting is we talked about this on the show, I think last week, is, well, reportedly there might be some sort of a deal between OpenAI and the White House, giving the White House / maybe the American people a cut of OpenAI when the company goes public. So, I mean, if employment disruption grows, a wealth distribution fund could become a recurring part of AI policy rather than just a fringe idea. But if you're thinking that, Americans are going to own 50% of AI companies, I'm going to tell you that's not going to happen. Might there be one of these smaller sovereign wealth funds where certain companies either voluntarily or are forced into giving a small percentage, maybe 1 to 5%. It's a possibility. And we've seen that so far with OpenAI, according to reports, going to the table with the White House and seemingly being in favor of something like this, right? Not necessarily, there was no report saying that they were agreeable to the terms that were reported, but at least that they're in talks. All right, let's go to our next AI news story. A big week for Meta, and well, another maybe punch in the gut for Anthropic with this one as well. So, Meta compressed its year-long AI catch-up into 3 days as the company released Muse Image, a Muse video preview, then its Muse Spark 1.1 model, and also its first public API. So, Muse Image can search, write code, refine its own work, and coordinate with Muse Spark. So, it launched across Meta AI, Instagram Stories, and select app markets. So, one rollout choice, though, immediately backfired because Meta previously included the ability to use AI to essentially kind of like the cameo feature that OpenAI had in Sora, where you could use AI to just make any photos of public Instagram accounts, and Meta pulled that out after a few days. All right, so that's Muse Image. It actually looked pretty impressive with the kind of results that I saw. Then they have Muse Video. So this remains an early preview. So this is not a broad release, unlike the Muse Image. So Meta says it supports Muse Video supports native audio while acknowledging gaps in synchronization and fast motion. So, but the samples they did show looked pretty good, right? But it looks like it might be a while until there's a public facing product on the video side. And then Meta followed it up with Spark 1.1, their newest large language model, which adds stronger coding, computer use, multi-agent orchestration, and a 1 million token context window. And that version now powers Meta AI's thinking mode. So here we go again. Zuck came out and essentially said, all the other companies are milking you when you're paying for tokens. We're going to offer you a good model for very cheap. So yeah, this is very much in the Grok 4.5 price range. So right now, you can access it in public preview for $1.25 per million input tokens and $4.25 per million output tokens. So yeah, very much they're in line with the Grok prices at 2 and 6, right? So even a little less than that at $1.25 and $4.25. So I think overall, right, if you're just comparing the two, because if you're a company that, just as an example, right, software development company, something in financial analysis, right? But essentially, if your company has become a token burning institution, but on the dev side writing code, you might be looking at some of these models licking your chops. I do think, at least according to most benchmarks, that it seems like Grok 4.5 is a little bit better on the coding side, but at least Meta's new Muse Spark 1.1 is a viable alternative, which most people were not expecting Meta to be on the bingo card of, top 4 or 5 coding agents in mid 2026. But here we are, at least when it comes to price per performance, because like I said, it seems like the rest of 2026 and heading into 2027, price per performance is going to be the big factor, not just what is the best benchmark that they can throw out there. And speaking of Meta's good week, Meta investors also learned that Meta plans to begin producing Iris, its first proprietary AI chip, this September. So it will supplement rather than replace NVIDIA's and AMD's GPUs. Meta is obviously one of NVIDIA's biggest customers, so they said that they just need more compute. So Wall Street liked the combined picture of the new photo model, the new video model, the new text model, and the new Iris chip, as their shares gained more than 5% on Friday, and they've already erased their 2026 losses, and Meta finished the week about 15% higher. So a overall huge week for Meta, but their week was not the best week, and that was OpenAI. So we already alluded to the new GPT 5.6 Soul, and we already kind of talked a little bit about the GPT Live 1 model. And we did, FYI, do a dedicated episode on the new GPT-5.6 Soul and the ChatGPT work on Friday. So make sure you just go listen to that. That's episode 816. But let's do the quick recap here of what OpenAI introduced, and it is good. So OpenAI launched GPT-5.6 across 3 different varieties, as well as ChatGPT work, pairing a frontier model release with a new desktop agent for everyday knowledge work. So GPT-5.6 comes in 3 tiers. Soul is the flagship, while Terra is the medium model, and then Luna is the cheaper and faster version. So Soul leads, in just pretty much every single benchmark. So LM Arena, it's tied with Fable 5 at the top. If you look at artificial analysis, they have 3 main indexes. So yeah, GPT-5 Soul leads in 2 of the 3, and the other 3, it's like 1 point behind. So at least if you look at the 4 kind of major indexes that bring all of these different votes and benchmarks together, OpenAI is tied or leading in 3 of the 4. In the other one, they're only behind by 1 point. But the surprising thing here is, right, GPT 5.6 is ahead in Design Arena. It is the #1 model, which is crazy because, right, everyone said, oh, it's going to take years for, OpenAI to ever catch Anthropic when it comes to design. So in a third party, the most respected third party model where the people and experts vote on it, yes, GPT 5.6 is great at front end design. So OpenAI's pricing, though, is the bigger pressure point because they list it at $5 per million input and $30 per million token output versus that 10 and 50 for Fable. So yeah, it's about half of the price for more of the performance. So yeah, that's why I said Anthropic's had a really bad week. So not only did they get knocked off at the frontier, right? And we'll see, I'm sure Fable 5.1 or Opus 5 is going to be here any hour. And I have a guess on when that's actually going to be coming. So not only did they get knocked off at the top end of their business, well, they also got maybe not knocked off, but they got chipped away at the bottom end because the last couple of months, open weight models have actually become good enough for a lot of production use. And then you came in with the proprietary options that are very cheap and very good in Grok 4.5 and Muse Spark 1.1. So then also from OpenAI is ChatGPT work. So this turns the same model family, right? So the GPT 5.6 models into finished documents, right? Spreadsheets, presentations, analysis, websites, and other professional work. So the simplest way to put it, ChatGPT work, because there is a little bit of confusion. I was confused as well. So essentially if you go to download the ChatGPT desktop app, now you get, well, it's called ChatGPT work, which is essentially like Codex Lite. Okay, so ChatGPT work is just Codex, but a little simpler, right? It doesn't have, as much of the coding tools accessible. It's just a cleaner, sleeker look. So if you're just used to the web version of ChatGPT, it might be like 10% overwhelming at first. But what's strange, y'all know I'm a huge Codex lover, and I'm like, Codex is still available, FYI. There's been a lot of confusion on that. But essentially, when you download the new ChatGPT desktop app now, ChatGPT work, or if you go to download Codex, they're the same thing. And then there's a toggle at the top, right? So you either choose ChatGPT work, and that gives you all the same features, just in a more minimal, non-technical interface. So it does all the same things, or you can choose Codex in the same app and then get some of those more technical views, right? So as an example, in Codex now, there's a dedicated tab for pull request, right? You don't have that in ChatGPT work, or you don't have the diff view, right? So you can look at the difference between two generated pieces of codes. So there's a lot of actually, since this was released on Thursday, there's actually been a handful of updates, and the team did announce that another big update is coming to the desktop app on Monday. This is great timing. It just so happens I'm doing a training on this, a couple hours after this next big release is coming out. But regardless, if you haven't checked out the new ChatGPT Work desktop app, it's really good because it is essentially just an easier, simpler version of Codex. All right, so that is a wrap for the big stories, but let's quickly go over the what's new and what's next. So Meta withdrew their Muse image Instagram account reference feature, like I referenced, after privacy backlash and criticism. Anthropic updated Claude code with an in-app browser. All right, so took them a while to bring that after Codex has had it for a couple of months. OpenAI's GPT-5.6 Soul model set an ARC AGI3 benchmark record. Meta Muse, we talked about that already, but to recap, new image and video models. Rumors are suggesting that OpenAI will fast track GPT-6 with a new pre-train for potentially a summer launch to counter Anthropic's upcoming Fable 5 Mythos 5.1. Meta discontinued. Oh, talked about that. I got some duplicates here. This is how you know this is put together by a human. An AI would never put together duplicates, right? CNBC reported a China-linked backdoor security threat tied to Claude code. OpenAI and new OpenAI entry solved all 5 at-coder algorithm contest problems, outperforming top human competitors. Yes, the first time that's ever happened. It's a little above my head, but pretty impressive that OpenAI was able to solve all 5 at-coder algorithm contest problems. All right, next, OpenAI also released their new GPT Real-Time 2.1. So kind of a version of the GPT Live one that they released for ChatGPT. Notion Agents came out. That's a standalone iPhone app where you can use Notion Agents. Google Voice AI, that's Gemini-powered automatic call transcription and summary for businesses. ByteDance's Dream 5.0 Pro, that's their new advanced image model with design, infographics, and layer editing. It is out, and their new video model should be coming out any day. Anthropic's Fable 5 got the access extended through July 19th. Oh, weird. What happened there? Well, that's a good place to end the show. And, I kind of alluded to this, I think, on the podcast on Thursday and Friday, and I posted something on Twitter because originally the Anthropic's Fable 5 was only supposed to be in subscription plans through yesterday, through Sunday, July 12th. And after GPT-5.6 Soul came out, I said there's a 0% chance that Anthropic gets rid of Fable 5 in subscriptions. They will be bleeding 8 figures a day. There's literally a 0% chance. And sure enough, they extended it through next week. So what does that mean? Well, that means this. This is my bold prediction. Join me next week and we'll see if I was right or not. They're going to do one of a couple of things, which is going to be exciting to watch. They're either going to come out with a Mythos Fable 5.1, which I would put a low probability. A higher probability is we see maybe an Opus 5 that would be at that GPT 5.6 Soul level. Or we're going to see a price cut for Fable 5, because I've heard respected people in the industry essentially say that Fable 5 is a dead model, right? Not me saying it. Literally, I've heard it and seen it from a lot of respected people that have said, we're never going to touch Fable 5 again because of the pricing, right? The capabilities are there. But when OpenAI comes and they undercut it and you say, oh, Fable 5, this 5.6 Soul is as good, but actually better, and it costs half. And depending on what benchmark you look at, right? Like the artificial analysis cost index, it's like a third. Yeah, it's not gonna. That's what I said. Very bad week for Anthropic, but what makes that fun is we do know that we're gonna get either new models or cheaper prices from Anthropic probably in the next week. That would be my guess. All right, so that's a wrap. I hope this was helpful. If so, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast and then go to youreverydayai.com. Sign up for the free daily newsletter. We'll see you back tomorrow and every day for more everyday AI. Thanks, y'all. Here's the thing about AI at work. You can't use what you don't trust. The all-new Slackbot runs inside Slack's security boundary, only sees what you've already allowed it to see, and never trains on your data. Personal AI agent with the trust to actually put it to work. Slackbot from Slack. Learn more at slack.com.
And that's a wrap for today's edition of Everyday AI. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating. It helps keep us going. For a little more AI magic, visit youreverydayai.com and sign up to our daily newsletter so you don't get left behind. Go break some barriers, and we'll see you next time.